The forgotten relic. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, illuminated only by the distant glow of dying stars. In the heart of a long-forgotten sector, a fleet of alien scavengers drifted toward their latest discovery. Their sensors had picked up something massive. An ancient, derelict warship floating silently among the debris of a ruined battlefield. It was covered in layers of dust and ice, a relic from a past war that no one remembered. Captain Selvar of the Threxian Empire stood on the bridge of his battleship, gazing at the strange object on the screen. The ship was enormous, far larger than any vessel his species had ever built, but its design was outdated, primitive even. Its hull was covered in scars from old battles, its turrets rusted and lifeless. His second-in-command, Officer Drawl, let out a chuckle. "Look at this thing. It's ancient, probably thousands of years old. Useless junk." The rest of the crew laughed. To them, the ship was nothing more than a broken relic, a piece of history that had long lost its importance. "Prepare the salvage drones," Selvar ordered. "Strip it down for parts. There might be some rare metals inside." As the scavenger ships moved in, one of the engineers, a young Threxian named Vectel, hesitated. His scaled fingers trembled as he analyzed the readings from the warship. Something was wrong. "Captain," he said cautiously, "the ship is unusual. Its energy signature is different from anything we've seen before." Selvar raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Vectel gulped. "It's still active." The bridge went silent. The rest of the officers exchanged confused glances. That was impossible. A ship this old should have been completely dead, drained of power centuries ago. "Are you saying it still has power?" Drawl scoffed. "Impossible. It hasn't moved in millennia." Vectel hesitated before nodding. "It's faint, but there's still energy in its core. And there's something else. The material of this ship, it doesn't match any known civilization in our records." Selvar frowned. "If it's not in the records, then who built it?" Vectel gulped. I don't know." Selvar sighed. He had heard enough. The ship was dead, forgotten by time. Whatever technology it once held was useless now. "Proceed with the salvage," he commanded. Drones flew toward the derelict warship, latching onto its hull with mechanical claws. The aliens watched as metal panels were torn away, exposing the dark, hollow interior of the ship. The inside was just as lifeless as they had expected. Dark corridors, shattered consoles, and rusted weapons. Then, it happened. A deep hum vibrated through space. It was low, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder with each passing second. The warship's surface shimmered as if it were waking up from a long slumber. The ice that had formed over its hull cracked and shattered, drifting into the void. Selvar's eyes widened. "What is happening?" The drones suddenly lost connection, their signals cut off as the warship's systems came online. Warning lights flashed across the Threxian ships as their sensors detected something terrifying. The warship was rebooting. Panels across its body slid open, revealing ancient but powerful cannons. The rusted exterior began repairing itself, as if the ship was healing. The energy signature that had once been faint now surged, glowing like a heartbeat. Then, across every screen on the Threxian fleet, a message appeared, written in a language they had never seen before. "Warning. Unauthorized access DTTTED. Humanities LJCE mused and to be disturbed." The bridge went silent. Every Threxian officer stared at the screen, confusion and fear written across their faces. Drawl's voice was barely a whisper. "Humanity. That's impossible. Humans disappeared thousands of years ago. They were just a myth." Selvar's blood ran cold. He had heard stories, ancient legends about a race of warriors who once ruled the stars, whose warships were feared across the galaxy, but they had been gone for over 100,000 years. Wiped out, forgotten. And yet, here, floating before them, was a warship built by humans, a warship that was now waking up. Zelvar took a shaky breath. Get us out of here. Now. But it was too late. The forgotten relic had awakened, and it was not happy. The Threxian fleet was in chaos. Alarms blared across every ship as the ancient warship's energy level skyrocketed. What had once been a cold, lifeless relic was now pulsing with power, its dormant systems awakening after thousands of years. The hull, once covered in ice and debris, now gleamed under the distant stars as hidden mechanisms repaired the damage. Captain Zelvar gripped the edge of his command chair, his claws digging into the metal. His officers scrambled to make sense of what was happening, their screens flooded with unreadable human text. The message still glowed ominously across their monitors. Wo ar nang. Unauthorized access DTECTE. Humanities LJCE mutist and OTB disturbed. Captain, what do we do? Drall's voice was panicked, his usually calm demeanor shattered. Retreat, Zelvar ordered without hesitation. Now, pull the fleet back to a safe distance. The Threxian ships powered up their engines, desperate to escape. But before they could move, a deep mechanical groan echoed through the void. The warship's massive engines flickered to life. Dust and debris exploded outward as the ship shook itself free from the grasp of time. And then, to their horror, it moved. Slowly at first, almost as if stretching after a long slumber, but then with a growing purpose. The ancient warship turned, its massive body aligning toward the Threxian fleet. It was no longer a dead relic. It was waking up. Vektil's trembling fingers danced over his controls, scanning the ship with wide, fearful eyes. See, Captain. The warship's weapons are activating. I'm detecting kinetic projectile systems, railguns, plasma turrets. He gasped. This ship is more advanced than anything we've ever seen. Zelvar didn't need to hear more. Full reverse. Get us out of its range. But it was too late. The warship's main cannon, a colossal weapon mounted at the ship's center, hummed as ancient power surged through it. The air around it crackled with energy as targeting systems locked onto the fleeing Threxian fleet. Then, without warning, boom! A single shot. The energy blast tore through the void like a star had been born in the darkness. It was not a laser, not plasma, but something else entirely, something beyond Threxian understanding. The shot didn't just hit one ship. It ripped through 3 vessels at once, tearing them apart like they were made of paper. The explosion sent debris flying in all directions, and the rest of the fleet was thrown into complete panic. We're under attack. Shields failing. 2 destroyers are gone. They didn't even have time to react. This isn't possible. How can an ancient warship do this? Zelvar's mind raced. This ship was not just active. It was angry. And it was built by a species that was supposed to be extinct. We have to communicate. Hail it. Try every known language. The communication officer frantically sent out signals, but the warship gave no response. It didn't ask questions. It didn't hesitate. It only acted. More of its weapons came to life. Side turrets rotated into position, missile bays opened, and the ship's entire body pulsed with raw, destructive energy. Zelvar clenched his jaw. If we don't fight back, we're all going to die. Drall turned to him in shock. Fight back. Against that, our best weapons barely scratched its hull. Then we stall. Fire everything we have. Buy time for the fleet to escape. The Threxian ships, desperate and terrified, opened fire. Beams of plasma, torpedoes, and railgun slugs rained toward the ancient warship. But as the shots reached its surface, something impossible happened. The attacks vanished. It wasn't a shield, at least not one the Threxians could understand. The projectiles and energy blasts seemed to distort, dissolve, or be absorbed before they could do any damage. The warship remained untouched, unaffected. Vektil gasped. Captain, it's adapting to our attacks. Zelvar's stomach dropped. A warship that could analyze and neutralize enemy fire. That kind of technology was beyond anything in the galaxy. Then, the warship responded. Boom, boom, boom. A series of rapid shots cut through the Threxian fleet like a blade through water. More ships exploded, their wreckage scattering into space. Screams filled the communication channels as the once proud fleet was reduced to nothing but burning debris. The warship wasn't just defending itself. It was eliminating intruders. Zelvar watched in horror as his fleet was being wiped out. They had made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. This wasn't just an old warship. This was a human war machine, and it was built for one purpose: to destroy anything that threatened its mission. And now, the Threxians were its enemies. Zelvar clenched his fists. There was only one choice left. Send out an emergency transmission, he ordered. His voice was grim. Warn the entire Empire. Tell them, we have awakened something we were never meant to find. The warship's engines flared. It was not finished yet. The Threxian fleet was shattered. What had once been a proud armada of warships was now nothing more than burning wreckage drifting in the void. Captain Zelvar stood frozen, his eyes locked on the ancient warship that had torn through his forces like they were nothing. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. The warship had stopped firing. Its weapons, which had annihilated half of his fleet in mere moments, were now eerily silent. The massive ancient vessel hovered in space, its hull gleaming with an unsettling light. Then, without warning, it spoke. A deep metallic voice boomed through every communication channel. The language was old, distorted, yet somehow understandable. It was a voice that carried authority, history, and an undeniable presence. Identify Warship UAVTRESPASSED on in humanity's domain. Silence filled the Threxian bridge. Every officer turned to look at Zelvar, their expressions a mixture of fear and disbelief. Did it just speak? Droll whispered, his scales paling. Zelvar swallowed hard. His species had scoured the galaxy for centuries, claiming abandoned territories and forgotten relics. Never once had a dead civilization spoken back. Taking a shaky breath, he stepped forward. "This is Captain Zelvar of the Threxian Empire," he said, his voice steady despite the terror gripping his chest. "We did not know this was your territory. We believe humanity was extinct." For a moment, there was no response. The warship remained still. Then the voice returned, colder, heavier. "Humanity and EVR dies." Zelvar's blood ran cold. He turned to Vectel, his tactical officer. "Scan for life forms. See if there's anyone piloting that ship." Vectel's fingers trembled as he activated the scanners. The results flashed on the screen. His eyes widened in shock. "See, Captain. There's no crew. The ship is empty." A warship that fought without a crew. That spoke as if it were alive. What kind of technology had humanity created? The warship's engines flared, and a massive energy surge pulsed through the void. Something was happening. Then the voice changed. It was no longer a cold demand. It became a message. A transmission. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the Threxian bridge. It was a human. The figure was clad in an advanced uniform, their expression grim. It was not a live transmission. This was a recording from thousands of years ago. If you are seeing this, it means our time has passed. But know this, humanity was never weak. We left our mark on the stars, and we ensured that if anyone came searching for our secrets, they would understand one thing. We do not forgive. We do not forget. The image flickered, and the voice grew darker. If you seek to conquer, you will be erased. If you seek to learn, then understand this. Some knowledge is not meant to be found. The hologram ended. The warship remained still. Zelvar's heart pounded. The message was clear. This was not just a relic of the past. This was a warning. a warning left behind by a species that had once ruled the stars. And now, their legacy had awakened. The Threxians had trespassed on something far beyond their control. And the warship was not finished yet. Captain Selvar stood frozen, his mind racing. The ancient warship before him was no ordinary relic. It was a guardian, a sentry left behind by a species that was supposed to be extinct. And yet, its presence felt more alive than any fleet he had ever encountered. The holographic message still echoed in his mind. If you seek to conquer, you will be erased. His fleet had already suffered immense losses. Half of his warships were gone, their wreckage floating lifelessly in the void. And yet, the human warship had stopped its attack. But why? Selvar took a deep breath. Open a channel, he ordered. Let's see if we can communicate with it. Drawl, his communications officer, hesitated. See, Captain, we don't even know if it's still listening. Do it, Selvar said firmly. Drawl's claws trembled as he activated the transmission. The bridge crew held their breath as Selvar spoke. This is Captain Selvar of the Threxian Empire, he said, his voice steady. We did not come here to start a war. We believe this system was abandoned. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a deep metallic voice responded. State your intentions. Selvar exchanged uneasy glances with his crew. The ship was listening. It was thinking. We seek knowledge, he said cautiously. We wish to understand what happened to humanity. Another pause. Then, the ship's voice grew darker. Humanity induarity. Humanity adapted. Humanity are remains. Selvar's blood ran cold. Remains. That wasn't the answer he expected. He turned to Vectel, his tactical officer, scanned the planet below. If this warship is still functional after thousands of years, there might be something else. Before Vectel could respond, the warship's weapons powered up again. Energy signatures flared across its hull. The crew braced for impact, but the warship did not fire at them. Instead, it directed its weapons toward the planet below. A massive beam of energy pierced through the clouds, striking the surface. Selvar watched in shock as the planet's crust began to crack open. What in the name of the void is it doing? Drawl gasped. Then they saw it. From beneath the surface, something was rising. At first, it looked like a mountain, a massive structure buried for millennia. But as the dust cleared, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was another warship. Larger, deadlier. Awakening. The Threxians had thought they discovered an old, abandoned vessel. They were wrong. They had woken a fleet. And now, humanity's true power was about to be revealed. Captain Selvar gripped the armrests of his command chair, his claws digging into the metal. His eyes were wide with disbelief as the massive warship emerged from beneath the planet's surface, dust and debris cascading from its ancient hull. It was far larger than the first ship they had encountered. Its silhouette blocked out the light from the nearest star, casting a monstrous shadow over the battlefield. A ship of pure terror. The bridge of the Threxian flagship was in chaos. Alarms blared. Crew members shouted. Vectel, the tactical officer, struggled to keep his voice steady. Captain, that ship, its power levels are off the charts. I've never seen anything like this. Selvar forced himself to breathe. They needed to understand what they were facing. Run a full scan, he ordered. I want to know everything about that warship. Drawl, the communications officer, was already working frantically. His scales had turned pale with fear. See, Captain, it's waking up. Selvar narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Drawl's voice trembled. It's not just powering up. It's thinking. Silence fell over the bridge. Then the monstrous ship moved. Slowly at first, its titanic engines roared to life, sending shockwaves through space. The sheer force of its awakening rattled every ship in the Threxian fleet. And then, the voice returned. But this time, it was not coming from a single warship. It was coming from all of them. Trees passers. Zelvar's blood ran cold. The voice was no longer just from one ship. It was from an entire fleet. Thrall gasped. Captain, I'm detecting multiple energy signatures. There's more of them. Zelvar turned to the main display screen. One by one, enormous shapes began to emerge. Not from the planet, from the darkness of space itself. They had been waiting, dormant, silent, hidden, until now. By the void, Vectol whispered. Hundreds of warships lit up at once, their ancient hulls gleaming with power. Zelvar realized the horrifying truth. This was never just one warship. It was a graveyard, a slumbering fleet, a sleeping giant. And now it was awake. The warships had been waiting. Humanity had vanished millennia ago, but they had left behind their most powerful creations. A defense network, a warning, and a final message. Should the darkness return, we shall rise once more. Zelvar's mind raced. Who were they protecting? What enemy had they prepared for? And then, an even worse realization struck him. These ships were not pointing their weapons at the Threxian fleet. They were pointing at something else. Something even further beyond. Something coming. Zelvar gritted his teeth. He had spent his life believing his people were the conquerors of the stars, that they were the most powerful force in the galaxy. Now he knew the truth. They were nothing compared to what humanity had feared. And if that enemy was still out there, then the galaxy was in far greater danger than he had ever imagined. Zelvar's breathing was shallow as he watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. The warship they had believed to be an ancient relic was only the first. Now, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of similar warships were activating, their once dark hulls flickering to life with a cold, calculating intelligence. The Threxian fleet had come expecting to claim a dead world, but instead they had awakened something that should have remained buried. A sense of dread settled deep in Zelvar's gut. This was not just an old human warship fleet. This was a trap set long ago, waiting for the moment an intruder dared to disturb it. And they had walked right into it. His crew scrambled for answers. Drall's voice shook as he reported that the fleet was moving in perfect formation, despite having been abandoned for hundreds of thousands of years. Vectol tried to scan the energy signatures again, but nothing made sense. The power levels were far beyond what should be possible. These were not normal warships. And then, without warning, the fleet spoke again. Pyrotoseol activated. The words echoed in every ship's communication system. The warships weren't transmitting in any known language, yet the meaning burned itself into Zelvar's mind with terrifying clarity. HFY STORIES. The first human warship, the one they had dared to approach, began moving toward them. Its sheer size dwarfed even the largest Threxian battlecruisers. Zelvar could now see its armaments shifting, massive cannons and missile silos emerging from their armored casings. It had been asleep for so long, but now it was fully awake. A warning siren blared. Vectol turned, his face ashen. Captain, they have locked onto us. Zelvar barely had time to react before the first shot was fired. It was not a beam. It was not a missile. It was something else entirely. A pulse of energy rippled through space, distorting the very fabric of reality. The moment it hit the Threxian flagship, Zelvar felt it before he saw it. Every system on the bridge shut down instantly. Lights flickered. Screens turned to static. Weapons deactivated. Even the artificial gravity flickered, sending the crew floating for a moment before stabilizing again. The ship had been completely disabled in a single shot. Zelvar gripped the armrest of his chair as his heart pounded in his chest. One shot had rendered their flagship powerless. Around them, the other Threxian ships were in chaos. Some drifted helplessly as their propulsion systems failed. Others tried to fire their weapons, but nothing happened. The human fleet had paralyzed them without even touching them. And then a final message came through. Leave. The voice was neither aggressive nor threatening. It was a command, a warning, a chance to escape. But Selvar knew one thing for certain. If they refused, the next shot would not be a disabling pulse. It would be the end. A choice lay before him. His fleet was trapped, his ships were outmatched, and his people were terrified. He had spent his life believing that the Threxians were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. But now, in the presence of an enemy who had been dead for 100,000 years, he understood how wrong they had been. If this was only the defensive fleet that humanity had left behind, then what kind of monsters had they been fighting? And more importantly, were those monsters still out there? The silence that followed was more terrifying than the attack itself. Zelvar's crew barely dared to breathe as the human warships loomed over them like ancient sentinels, their cold steel hulls reflecting the distant light of the stars. The warning had been given. Leave. It was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was an order. Zelvar clenched his fists. Every instinct told him to flee, to take what remained of his fleet and escape before these warships decided to finish what they started. But a part of him still resisted. The Threxians were a proud species, a warrior race that had never surrendered in battle. To retreat was to show weakness. To retreat was to admit that they had been outmatched. But they had been. His flagship was disabled. The entire fleet was paralyzed. One shot, just one, had reduced their mightiest warships to floating debris. If the humans had chosen to destroy them, there would have been nothing left. The terrifying truth was inescapable. The humans had not even tried. They had held back. Zelvar turned to his crew. His officers were shaking. Vektal's hands hovered uselessly over his console, unable to restart the ship's systems. Dral's mandibles twitched as he tried to suppress his terror. Even his most hardened warriors looked defeated. They all knew what he knew. This was not a fight. This was a lesson. A deep breath filled Selvar's lungs. He had a duty to his people, to his fleet, to the Threxian Empire. And that duty was no longer to fight. It was to survive. He made his choice. "Send the recall signal to all ships," he ordered. His voice was firm, but inside, he felt the weight of 1,000 years of arrogance crumbling. "We are leaving." The crew hesitated. No Threxian had ever given such an order before. No Threxian had ever turned away from battle. But this was not a battle. It never had been. One by one, the officers nodded. The fleet struggled to regain control. Some ships had enough power left to move. Others had to be towed. They abandoned their weapons, their pride, their false belief in superiority, and turned their ships away from the ghostly human warships that watched them in eerie silence. As they fled, Selvar glanced one last time at the wreckage of the battlefield. The human fleet did not pursue. It simply remained, waiting, watching, guarding something far greater than anyone had imagined. And that's when a chilling realization crept into his mind. This was only the first layer of defenses. If abandoned human ships from 100,000 years ago were still operational, still capable of neutralizing a Threxian armada in seconds, then what else was out there? What had the humans been preparing for? And more terrifyingly, was it still coming?